Sergeant Kofi Mensah, a hero who had faced down death on 100 battlefields, now lay defeated on Apex Medical's gleaming operating table. The rhythmic beep of his heart monitor was growing erratic, a frantic protest against the life ebbing from him. Dr. Krystyna Novak, head of surgery, a woman whose name commanded reverence, finally dropped her hands, defeat twisting her features. "He's unsalvageable," she declared, her voice a hollow echo in the hushed theater, a verdict that snuffed out all hope. Despair, thick and suffocating, settled over the elite team, their renowned skills failing. Amidst the defeated giants, a quiet figure remained. Nizhoni Blackhorse, a rookie nurse, her presence almost invisible, stood at the periphery, her gaze fixed on Kofi. No panic clouded her dark eyes, no resignation. Instead, a peculiar intensity burned there, as if she alone could read the unwritten story on Kofi's fading form. She was just a nurse, overlooked and underestimated, yet deep within her, a silent certainty stirred. The established world had given up, but Nizhoni, with her hidden past, felt the faint pulse of a different possibility, a radical solution others could not conceive. His life was not over, not if she had anything to say about it. Dr. Krystyna Novak, usually an impenetrable fortress of composure, felt her world contract to the agonizing throb in her temples. Unsalvageable, the word tasted like ash, a public confession of professional limits, a stark betrayal of the hero on the table. Her hands fell, heavy and useless, mirroring the collapse of her will. Her shoulders slumped. The whispers of her team, meant to be sympathetic, felt like the rustle of leaves over a fresh grave. She felt Dr. Sato's sharp, calculating eyes on her, and the thought was a fresh stab. Apex Medical Center, her domain, now felt like a glass house, its walls shattering around her. Krystyna walked from the operating table with the dragging steps of a condemned woman. She leaned heavily against the cool, sterile wall, scrubbing a gloved hand over her face, uncaring if she smudged the residue of her own failure. The air, thick with antiseptic and defeat, pressed down. A decorated war hero, Sergeant Kofi Mensah, was dying on her watch, not from enemy fire, but from an enemy within she couldn't conquer. Her brilliance, her reputation, all amounted to nothing. The crushing weight of responsibility, compounded by the rare coagulopathy that made every conventional intervention a lethal gamble, was too much. She was Krystyna Novak, head of surgery, and she had failed. In the periphery, Nizhoni Blackhorse felt the sting of Krystyna's despair. She watched the head of surgery's rigid posture crumple, saw the raw grief in her usually impassive eyes. It was a private moment, a powerful surgeon undone, and a part of Nizhoni wanted to avert her gaze. But the other part, the part that remembered the desperate improvisation of a combat zone, the preternatural whisper of a dying breath, could not. Kofi Mensah's life was still ebbing, a fragile flame flickering in the harsh wind of medical dogma. Nizhoni had tried, in her quiet way, to voice concerns earlier. During initial consultations, while Dr. Sato rattled off textbook solutions and Dr. Novak weighed intricate surgical options, Nizhoni saw subtle signs in Kofi's vitals, minute deviations others dismissed. She murmured, almost to herself, his clotting factors, they're fluctuating too wildly for an invasive approach. But her voice, unamplified by rank or renown, was lost in the flurry of senior discussion, dismissed as a rookie's musing. Dr. Sato had barely graced her with a glance. "Nurse, focus on maintaining the IVs. We have experienced surgeons here." The rebuke, though mild, was a sharp reminder of her place, a rookie indigenous nurse in an elite, predominantly white institution. Now, as the giants fell, her warnings echoed in her own mind. This was it. The moment for silence was over. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the hospital's sterile hush. Approaching Dr. Novak felt like stepping onto a minefield, yet not approaching felt like complicity in Kofi's death. She took a breath, the scent of iodine filling her lungs, and moved, not directly towards the devastated surgeon, but to a position where her voice, though soft, could reach Krystyna's ear without echoing through the entire theater. "Dr. Novak?" Her voice was a mere wisp, barely audible over the hum of the monitors, a sound so unexpected it made Krystyna flinch, her head snapping up. Her eyes, bloodshot and raw, fixed on Nizhoni, a mixture of annoyance and exhaustion warring within them. "Now is not the time, Nurse Blackhorse." The words were clipped, sharp, a reflex of authority even in despair. Nizhoni did not retreat. She held Krystyna's gaze, her own dark eyes unwavering, reflecting a knowledge that defied her humble uniform. I know what this is," she whispered, the words tumbling out, laced with a quiet, desperate urgency. "His specific coagulopathy, it's not what we're trained for here, not in this way." Dr. Sato, who had been lingering near the control panel, apparently reviewing charts but clearly observing the exchange, let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Nurse, with all due respect, if Dr. Novak doesn't know, what makes you think you do?" His tone was condescending, a thinly veiled sneer that conveyed the vast chasm in their respective standings. Krystyna, though shaken by her own failure, felt a flare of indignation. How dare this rookie, this nurse, imply she possessed knowledge beyond the collective wisdom of Apex? "Nurse Blackhorse, that's enough," she said, her voice regaining some of its steel, ready to put Nizhoni back in her place, to protect the last shreds of her dignity. But Nizhoni took another step closer, her voice dropping even lower, an almost conspiratorial murmur that seemed to cut through the sterile air, resonating only with Krystyna. Her eyes, however, seemed to carry the weight of untold stories, of grit and trauma far removed from the pristine halls of Apex. "I trained in combat zones," she stated, the unexpected words dropping like stones into a still pond. "I've seen this. I know what to do." The quiet pronouncement hung in the air, audacious, impossible. Krystyna stared, her professional indignation suddenly dwarfed by a profound, disorienting shock. The words, so out of place, so unexpected from this unassuming young woman, struck her with the force of a physical blow. Combat zones? This quiet, unassuming nurse? Disbelief warred with a terrifying, forbidden spark of something else, a sliver of desperate hope that Krystyna had believed utterly extinguished. Sato, overhearing, scoffed loudly, "Combat zones? Are you suggesting we send a nurse to war?" His mockery was harsh, but Krystyna didn't hear it, her gaze locked on Nizhoni. Krystyna's mind reeled. Combat zones? The phrase detonated in her consciousness, shattering the carefully constructed edifice of her medical world. Every instinct screamed impossible. Every lesson learned, every protocol revered, every year of grueling training, demanded she dismiss it outright. Nurses assisted, they did not lead. Especially not in a case of this magnitude, this complexity. And yet, the absolute, abject despair that had gripped her moments ago, the chilling certainty of Kofi's death, had left a raw, gaping wound in her resolve. A sliver of light, however forbidden, now flickered within that darkness. Sato, seizing the opportunity to reassert conventional order, stepped forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "Dr. Novak, are we truly considering the delusions of a newly minted nurse? This isn't a field tent in some backwater, it's Apex Medical Center. Our patient needs a surgeon, not a storyteller." He gestured dismissively at Nizhoni, then back at the monitors. "Sergeant Mensah's unique coagulopathy makes any internal intervention a gamble with fatal odds. Her expertise is utterly irrelevant to this highly specialized scenario." As Sato spoke, a low, urgent alarm began to chirp from Kofi's bedside monitor. The rhythmic beat-beat-beep of his heart rate had accelerated, now accompanied by the ominous thump-thump-thump of his plummeting blood pressure. Krystyna instinctively turned, her professional focus momentarily eclipsing the internal turmoil. Blood pressures dropping fast. A junior resident called out, eyes wide with alarm. "Systolic just hit 70. Nizhoni, her gaze still fixed on Kofi, not the monitors, took a quiet step closer to the bed. Her voice, though still soft, carried a new, unwavering urgency. "His peripheral perfusion is failing. It's not just the hemorrhage, Dr. Novak. The underlying coagulopathy is exacerbating a systemic inflammatory response, creating microthrombosis. The current vasopressors won't compensate for that, they'll worsen it." Sato scoffed again, moving to silence the alarm. "Nonsense. We're still managing the primary bleed, Nurse Blackhorse. The vasopressors are essential to maintain perfusion. Microthrombosis? From a nurse? Really? He exchanged a look with another doctor, a dismissive sneer plastered on his face. He increased the dosage of the vasopressor, attempting to force Kofi's pressure up. A moment later, the monitor shrieked a high-pitched, sustained tone. Flatline. The sound ripped through the sterile silence, tearing away Krystyna's indecision and sending a jolt of pure terror through the room. "He's coding," someone yelled. The anesthesiologist immediately began chest compressions, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump against Kofi's ribs a brutal counterpoint to the piercing alarm. Krystyna felt the cold tendrils of panic grip her. This was it. She'd lost him. All her skill, all her knowledge, had been utterly insufficient. Sato, pale with shock, stared at the flatlining monitor, his arrogance momentarily evaporating into sheer dread. "No!" Nizhoni's voice, now clear and resonant, cut through the rising chaos. She moved with a decisive swiftness, placing a hand gently on Krystyna's arm. "Dr. Novak, you must stop the vasopressors immediately. They are driving the microthrombosis, starving his heart, not helping it. We need to stabilize the inflammatory response before we can address the bleed. I can guide you. There's a way." Krystyna looked at Nizhoni, then at Kofi's lifeless body, then back at Nizhoni's eyes, unwavering, intelligent, utterly convinced. The conventional path had just led them to this abyss. Her career, her reputation, her entire professional identity was built on that path. To deviate now, to trust this quiet, unknown nurse, was to risk everything. Her colleagues would call her reckless, desperate, insane. Sato would ensure it. But the alternative was Kofi's certain death, a burden that would crush her. The images of his decorated uniform, his brave service, flashed through her mind. He deserved better than this. He deserved a chance. And in Nizhoni's eyes, Krystyna saw not desperation, but a fierce, quiet certainty. "Stop compressions." Krystyna barked, her voice strained but firm. The anesthesiologist paused, bewildered. "And Sato, reduce the vasopressor to 0. Now." Sato stared, aghast. "Dr. Novak, this is madness. You're risking his life and your career on the word of a nurse who claims combat zone experience." His voice was laced with outrage, but Krystyna merely glared at him, an inferno of despair and newfound resolve burning in her eyes. "His life is gone on our word, Dr. Sato," she retorted, her voice cracking with the admission of failure. "Unless we try something else. Everyone stand back. Nurse Blackhorse, what do we do?" The silence that followed was deafening, save for the rhythmic thump-thump of the heart monitor that miraculously began to show a faint, erratic rhythm as the vasopressors were reduced. The air in the operating room crackled with disbelief, fear, and a terrifying, desperate hope. Krystyna had made her choice. The stakes had never been higher. Nizhoni's courage to speak up, to trust her unique expertise even when overlooked, resonates with a feeling many of us know, the quiet power waiting for its moment. If her story of the underestimated hero speaks to you, we warmly invite you to join our journey. Hit that subscribe button. Become part of our growing global community of story lovers, where every subscription helps us bring more compelling, high-quality narratives like Nizhoni's to life. Let's celebrate these extraordinary tales together. Welcome to our storytelling family. The faint, erratic rhythm on the monitor, a ghost of a heartbeat, was a cruel tease. It flickered for a few agonizing seconds, a desperate flutter against the encroaching silence, before finally succumbing. A long, agonizing beep sliced through the tense silence, flatlining, screaming its final, terrible truth. Kofi Mensah was gone. Panic, cold and sharp, erupted. "He's flatlining. Start compressions." "AP." Dr. Miller, the resident, barked, grabbing the paddles. Krystyna felt the bottom drop out of her world. Despair, a crushing wave, threatened to engulf her again, worse than before. She had dared to hope, to trust, and it had failed. Sato, a grim satisfaction battling with his own fear, shook his head. "I told you, Dr. Novak. This was a fool's errand. Amidst the rising chaos, a quiet voice cut through the noise, steady as a heartbeat in a storm. Stop compressions. Everyone froze, paddles hovering, syringes poised. All eyes snapped to Nizhoni, who stood by Kofi's head, her gaze fixed not on the monitor, but on the barely perceptible rise and fall of his chest, searching for something only she could see. Nurse Blackhorse, what are you doing? Krystyna's voice, though strained, held a flicker of the trust she'd just declared. The desperation was back, raw and palpable. Nizhoni ignored the cacophony of the room, her voice gaining an impossible clarity. The compression is causing more damage. The coagulopathy, it's not a clot we're chasing, it's a structural failure. He's bleeding out from the pressure. We need to reduce the pressure, then seal the specific vessel, or he'll hemorrhage further internally, even without a heartbeat. She looked directly at Krystyna, her eyes holding a fierce, unyielding certainty. He's not gone. Not yet. His body is fighting, but our standard interventions are making it worse. Krystyna stared, her mind reeling. Reduce pressure? Without compressions? It defied everything she knew, everything she had been taught. Her entire career screamed no. This was professional suicide, plain and simple. Yet, the image of Kofi's fading life, the echo of Nizhoni's quiet conviction, spurred her on. The alternative was a certainty of death, and Krystyna, for all her rigidity, was not ready to accept it. She had committed. There was no turning back. Stand back, everyone. Krystyna commanded, her voice thin but firm. She waved away Miller, who looked utterly bewildered. Sato, hand me the small curved forceps. The ones usually for microvascular repair. Sato blanched. Those aren't for this kind of bleeding, Dr. Novak. They're too delicate, too small. This is madness. Nizhoni, her gaze still locked with Krystyna's, didn't spare Sato a glance. Dr. Novak, you need to open him precisely here. Just a few millimeters, following the previous incision. Her finger, gloved and steady, pointed to a minuscule spot on Kofi's chest. My guidance will be verbal. We can't waste time on imaging. The bleed is pinpoint, but relentless. Fear, cold and sharp, clawed at Krystyna's throat. This was not just breaking protocol, it was shattering it into 1,000 pieces. She was relying on a nurse's whispered perception, on a hunch that seemed utterly illogical. Yet, the conviction in Nizhoni's eyes was undeniable, a beacon in Krystyna's personal abyss of despair. The image of the unsalvageable Kofi flashed, juxtaposed with Nizhoni's unwavering belief. She took a shuddering breath. Scalpel. Give me the scalpel. Her hand trembled slightly as she took the instrument, but her resolve hardened. She leaned closer, straining to see what Nizhoni was pointing to. Lower, Dr. Novak. A fraction of a millimeter to the left. Yes, there. Nizhoni's voice was a low hum of instruction, a soothing yet commanding presence. Krystyna made the minuscule cut, barely breaking the surface. There's nothing there, nurse. Just tissue, she whispered, frustration rising. Trust me. It's collapsed. The pressure needs to be relieved before it can be seen. It's hidden by the initial trauma. As Krystyna, against every instinct, made the cut exactly as directed, a slight, controlled gush of blood appeared, not the catastrophic torrent she'd braced for, but a precise release. It was still alarming, but somehow different. Controlled. Now, the forceps, Dr. Sato. Nizhoni's voice was calm, authoritative. Sato, now just an aide, bewildered, automatically handed them over. Nizhoni didn't even touch Kofi directly, but guided Krystyna's hands, her eyes, with unnerving accuracy. The smaller vessel, Dr. Novak. The one partially obscured by the larger hematoma. You'll see a faint pulsable glow just beneath the surface. Krystyna, her brow furrowed in concentration, squinted. And then, she saw it. A tiny, almost invisible vessel, hemorrhaging. Something she would have missed, written off as diffuse bleeding. Something that would have continued to bleed Kofi to death slowly, inexorably, even with a beating heart. Nizhoni's voice was a lifeline, each word a precise instruction, a calm beacon in the storm of medical emergency. "Clamp it, Dr. Novak." Gently, but firmly. "Not the main artery, just that feeder." Krystyna obeyed, her fingers moving with a precision she hadn't known she possessed, guided by Nizhoni's calm commands. The moment the clamp closed, the long, agonizing beep on the monitor broke. It stuttered, then let out a tentative thump, thump, thump. A rhythm. Weak, but present. The panic in the room subsided slightly, replaced by utter astonishment. Sato's face was a mask of disbelief, his previous smugness wiped clean. Krystyna looked at Nizhoni, truly looked at her for the first time. Not as a subordinate, but as an oracle. The raw, terrifying courage she had summoned to defy protocol now felt less like a reckless gamble and more like an act of profound faith. She was no longer just operating, she was learning, transforming, seeing her own limitations illuminated by Nizhoni's extraordinary perception. The fight for Kofi's life had just truly begun, and Krystyna knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that Nizhoni was the only one who could win it. The sudden, weak thump, thump-thump was a lifeline thrown from the abyss. The collective breath in the operating room, held for an eternity, exhaled in a shaky, almost silent whoosh. Dr. Sato, mouth agape, looked as though he'd witnessed a ghost. But it was Krystyna, her eyes still locked on Nizhoni, who felt the profound shift. The hierarchy, the protocols, her entire understanding of medical practice, it had all evaporated in the face of this unassuming nurse's impossible insight. "Good," Nizhoni's voice was a low hum, barely audible above the new, fragile rhythm of Kofi's heart. There was no triumph in it, only a quiet, focused determination. "Now, Dr. Novak, we must reinforce the damaged wall of the mesenteric artery. It's not a full rupture, but a slow weep, exacerbated by the coagulopathy. Traditional sutures won't hold." Krystyna nodded, unable to speak, her mind racing to reconcile the impossible with the now. She looked down at the delicate tissue, suddenly understanding Nizhoni's earlier instructions. A slow weep. Not a gushing wound. No wonder standard approaches had failed. It required a different kind of repair, a gentle coaxing, not aggressive intervention. "I've used a fibrin sealant in the field, combined with an adhesive mesh," Nizhoni continued, her eyes scanning the surgical tray, picking out instruments Krystyna hadn't even considered for this type of procedure. "Dr. Sato, if you would hand me the microcatheter with the sealant delivery system, please. And Dr. Novak, guide the scope slightly deeper, towards the distal segment." Sato, still visibly shaken, fumbled for the instrument. His hands, usually so steady, trembled as he passed the delicate device to Nizhoni. His gaze, however, remained fixed on her, a strange mix of incredulity and dawning respect warring in his eyes. He watched as Nizhoni, with an almost surgical grace, carefully attached the tiny catheter to the sealant dispenser, her movements precise, economic, utterly confident. Krystyna, meanwhile, followed Nizhoni's instruction, guiding the laparoscopic scope with newfound sensitivity. She saw it then, through the magnified lens, a fine, almost imperceptible sheen of blood seeping from a tiny, hair-thin fissure in the artery wall. It was insidious, almost invisible, a death by 1,000 cuts, precisely as Nizhoni had described. "All right, Dr. Novak," Nizhoni murmured, her eyes now on the monitor, not on Krystyna's hands. It was as if she could feel the precise position of the scope, see through Krystyna's eyes. "Advance the catheter now, slowly. I'll tell you when to stop." Krystyna pushed the microcatheter, millimeter by agonizing millimeter. Her breath hitched. The entire room seemed to hold its own. The monitor showed Kofi's vital signs, still weak, but holding. Each tiny shift of the catheter felt like an earthquake in her hands. "Stop," Nizhoni commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "Now, inject the fibrin sealant." A very small, controlled burst. Just enough to create a scaffold. Krystyna pressed the plunger, a microscopic puff of sealant blossoming around the fissure on the monitor. It was like watching a spider spin a silken web, delicate yet powerful. "Hold," Nizhoni instructed. Let it set. The silence stretched, thick with anticipation. Krystyna felt a drop of sweat trace a cold path down her temple. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic counterpoint to Kofi's weak but persistent rhythm. She looked at Nizhoni again, at the unwavering focus in her eyes, the complete absence of doubt. This wasn't guesswork, it was a profound, instinctive knowledge, honed in the crucible of absolute necessity. Now, Dr. Novak, we'll layer the adhesive mesh, Nizhoni continued, handing Krystyna a minuscule, preloaded mesh applicator. It's delicate. Place it over the sealed area, pressing gently to ensure adherence. This provides the structural support without adding undue pressure that could cause a new rupture. Krystyna took the applicator, her hands now steadier, her initial fear slowly giving way to a strange, almost hypnotic calm induced by Nizhoni's presence. She followed the whispered commands, maneuvering the tiny mesh patch with an precision she hadn't believed herself capable of. It was an alien dance, a choreography of controlled chaos, with Nizhoni as the unseen conductor. Dr. Chen, the usually unflappable anesthesiologist, leaned forward, eyes glued to the monitor. Vitals are improving slightly, he announced, his voice tinged with a disbelief that echoed through the room. Pressure is stabilizing. Heart rate, though still fast, is stronger. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the observation gallery, where other stunned doctors and nurses watched. Dr. Sato, however, still stood rigidly, his arms crossed, though his face was a portrait of internal conflict. His arrogance was battling with undeniable, empirical evidence. He watched Nizhoni's every movement, searching for a flaw, a moment of hesitation, anything that would allow him to dismiss this impossible unfolding. But there was none. Krystyna felt a profound humility settle over her. She, the renowned head of surgery, was merely a conduit for this rookie nurse's extraordinary vision. Every precise movement, every perfectly timed instruction, revealed a depth of experience and intuition that transcended formal training. Nizhoni wasn't just telling her what to do, she was showing her a new way to see, to understand the fragile mechanics of life and death. The operating room, once a temple of rigid protocols, had been transformed into a sacred space of improvisation, guided by a quiet, unwavering truth. The bleeding, though not entirely stopped, was slowing. The war hero, Kofi, was not yet saved, but for the first time in hours, he wasn't actively dying. And that, in itself, was a miracle. One more, Dr. Novak. Just here. Nizhoni's voice, a steady current in a sea of dread, directed Krystyna's hand. Her finger, firm and precise, indicated a point deep within the wound, a tiny, almost invisible tear in a crucial vessel that was the final piece of the devastating puzzle. Krystyna, her entire being focused through Nizhoni's guidance, felt a flicker of absolute trust, a sensation alien in such a high-stakes, unconventional scenario. She performed the delicate maneuver, a stitch, a clamp, a whisper of a repair, with a precision she hadn't known she possessed until this moment. Then, there was silence. Not the immediate, absolute silence of failure, but a profound, expectant hush that fell over the operating theater. The rhythmic beep-beep-beep of Kofi's heart monitor, which had been erratic, a frantic drumming against the walls of their hope, now settled into a slower, stronger cadence. The blood pressure, sluggish moments ago, began a slow, steady climb, each millimeter of mercury a victory flag unfurling. Krystyna's hands, still poised over Kofi's body, trembled. She looked at the monitor, then back at Nizhoni. The rookie nurse hadn't moved. Her eyes, usually veiled by a quiet modesty, were now sharp, unblinking, fixed on Kofi's chest. She wasn't looking at the instruments, or the monitors, or Krystyna. She was looking into Kofi, reading the subtle language of his returning life. A slow, almost imperceptible nod. He's stabilizing, Nizhoni whispered, her voice still quiet, but now imbued with the authority of irrefutable truth. The words, so simple, detonated an emotional bomb within Krystyna. The unbearable weight she had carried for hours, the crushing guilt of nearly giving up, the despair that had threatened to consume her, all lifted in a single, gut-wrenching wave of relief. Her shoulders slumped, a gasp tearing from her throat. Tears, hot and sudden, blurred her vision, spilling down her cheeks. She was not crying for failure, or even for the stress, but for the sheer, raw, overwhelming miracle she had just witnessed and been a part of. She felt a profound sense of catharsis, as if years of suppressed emotion had finally found an escape valve. Kofi was alive. He wasn't just not dying, he was living. Dr. Sato, who had been frozen in a tableau of disbelief and professional disdain, finally moved. He took a hesitant step closer, his eyes darting from the monitor to Nizhoni, then to Krystyna, whose face was a mask of tear-streaked awe. His own jaw, clenched tight with skepticism, slowly unhinged. The arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed astonishment. He had watched, searching for the trick, the flaw, the moment this elaborate charade would crumble. But it hadn't. It had succeeded. His ambition, his carefully constructed superiority, had just been utterly dismantled by a quiet nurse. He was silenced, not just by shock, but by the undeniable, visceral proof of a brilliance that defied all his preconceived notions. Krystyna finally pulled her gaze from the monitors, her eyes, still wet, fixing on Nizhoni. Nizhoni, the name was a broken whisper, loaded with ingratitude too vast for mere words. She reached out, her hand hovering, then gently grasping Nizhoni's arm, her touch conveying a depth of respect and wonder she hadn't felt in years. You saved him." Nizhoni met her gaze, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips, a flicker of warmth in her usually reserved demeanor. It wasn't triumph she projected, but rather a quiet, serene satisfaction, the calm after the storm. She didn't seek credit, she simply acknowledged the truth. "We saved him, Dr. Novak," she corrected softly, ever humble, ever focused on the shared effort, even though Krystyna knew the true authorship of this miracle. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the operating room staff. The scrub nurses, the anesthesiologist, the circulating nurse, all felt the release of tension, their own fears for Kofi now replaced by a shared, silent elation. Shoulders sagged, expressions softened, and one of the junior nurses openly wiped away a tear. The air in the room, thick with the scent of antiseptic and the oppressive weight of impending death, had lightened, filled now with the fragile perfume of hope. Kofi's vital signs continued to hold steady, a testament to the extraordinary, unconventional intervention. The war hero, who had faced death on countless battlefields, had just been pulled back from the brink by a different kind of warrior, guided by a wisdom forged not in medical textbooks, but in the crucible of improvisation and empathy. In that moment, the rigid hierarchy of Apex Medical Center fractured, making way for a profound, humbling realization. The greatest expertise often resided not where it was expected, but where it was truly needed. The air in the operating theater, once charged with dread, now hummed with a fragile, almost disbelieving relief. Dr. Krystyna Novak, her gloved hand still hovering near Kofi's chest, slowly straightened. Her eyes, bloodshot from strain and exhaustion, found Nizhoni Blackhorse across the table. The usual sharpness in Novak's gaze was replaced by something profound, a raw, unvarnished awe that stripped away layers of professional distance and hierarchical pride. "Nizhoni," Novak breathed, the single word carrying the weight of an entire world shifted on its axis. It wasn't a command, or even a question, but an utterance of profound revelation. Her voice, usually crisp and authoritative, was laced with a tremor of pure humility. She pulled off her mask, her face pale but her eyes shining with an emotion Nizhoni had never seen in her before, genuine, unreserved reverence. You saved him," Novak continued, her gaze sweeping over the now stable vitals monitor, then back to the quiet nurse. "You saved him when I had given up hope. When we all had." The admission was stark, a public dismantling of her own formidable ego. It was an acknowledgement not just of Nizhoni's skill, but of her own crushing despair and subsequent misjudgment. Dr. Hiroki Sato, still frozen near the monitors, finally managed a slow, disbelieving blink. His face, usually a canvas of cool ambition, was utterly blank, then slowly began to flush with a deep, furious mortification. He opened his mouth, perhaps to salvage some shred of his earlier disdain, but no words came. His usual witty barbs were crushed under the sheer, undeniable reality of Kofi Mensah's steady heartbeat. He was silenced, not by a reprimand, but by irrefutable proof of his own error, a silent testament to Nizhoni's quiet power. The junior staff, previously awed by Sato, now watched him with a nascent understanding, a subtle shift in their own internal hierarchy of respect. Nizhoni, for her part, simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Her focus immediately returned to Kofi, her gentle fingers adjusting a line, ensuring everything remained perfect. There was no triumph in her posture, no hint of self-congratulation. It was as if she had simply performed her duty, no more, no less. Her humility was not a performance, it was ingrained, a natural extension of her spirit. Novak moved around the operating table, coming to stand directly in front of Nizhoni. Her touch, when it came, was feather-light on Nizhoni's shoulder. "Nizhoni," she said again, softer this time, where did you learn this? This isn't in any textbook. This isn't taught in any program I know." There was a yearning in her voice, a desire to understand the wellspring of this extraordinary capability. Nizhoni finally met Novak's gaze, her own dark eyes calm and deep. "My people, we've always had healers, Dr. Novak. We learn to see what others miss, to listen to what the body is trying to say." She paused, then continued, her voice still a soft whisper, but now infused with a quiet strength that filled the suddenly hushed room. "And then, after nursing school, I worked with Médecins Sans Frontières. In places where there were no hospitals, no fancy equipment. Just people bleeding, and a lot of ingenuity needed to keep them alive." She didn't elaborate with dramatic tales of conflict zones or improvised surgeries under fire. Instead, she offered a glimpse into the philosophy forged in those crucibles. "You learn to trust your instincts," she explained, her gaze briefly flickering towards Kofi, "to adapt. To understand that sometimes, the most precise cuts aren't with a scalpel, but with an idea, with a different way of seeing the problem. And I learned to read the dying, to see the moment they could be pulled back, because you had to. There was no other choice." Novak listened, utterly captivated. It wasn't just a resume, it was a revelation of a soul shaped by profound experience and innate wisdom. This was not merely a nurse with unique qualifications, this was a healer whose expertise was rooted in empathy, necessity, and a deeply human connection to suffering. Nizhoni's quiet competence wasn't just technical, it was an extension of who she was, a testament to resilience, resourcefulness, and a profound respect for life that transcended rigid medical doctrines. "Thank you, Nizhoni," Novak said, her voice thick with emotion, her hand tightening almost imperceptibly on the younger woman's shoulder. It was more than gratitude, it was an apology, an acknowledgement of her own blindness, and a profound respect for the humble strength that had resided, unseen, within Apex Medical Center. In that moment, Dr. Krystyna Novak, head of surgery, had not only been humbled but irrevocably transformed. She had seen the future of medicine, not in gleaming technology or advanced degrees alone, but in the compassionate, adaptable, and deeply human spirit of a rookie nurse. Sergeant Kofi Mensah's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Days later, he awoke, disoriented but alive, a faint scar the only testament to the battle waged within his body. His grateful family, having prepared for the worst, embraced him with tears and relieved laughter. Kofi, a man accustomed to confronting death on the battlefield, knew instinctively that he owed his life to an unseen hand, a quiet triumph against overwhelming odds. He heard whispers of a rookie nurse and an unconventional procedure, and a quiet determination settled in his eyes. He would find this person, this improbable savior. His recovery became Apex's most celebrated case, but beneath the statistics, it was a profound human story of resilience and unexpected heroism. For Dr. Krystyna Novak, the consequences were profound and immediate. The initial professional blow, admitting defeat, then relying on a junior nurse, had been a bitter pill. But the success, and Nizhoni's quiet competence, had shattered her rigid worldview. She felt a deep, abiding humility, an unburdening from the weight of always having to be the sole expert. Novak leveraged her considerable influence, not to obscure the truth, but to champion it. She began restructuring departmental meetings, ensuring that not only senior physicians but also experienced nurses and even junior residents had a platform to contribute. She initiated specialized training modules based on Nizhoni's unique field trauma techniques, insisting on a more holistic, adaptable approach to complex cases. Her leadership, once formidable and slightly unyielding, transformed into something more collaborative, empathetic, and ultimately, more effective. She sought Nizhoni's input directly, treating her not as a subordinate, but as a valued peer, a fount of knowledge she had been too blind to see. Dr. Hiroki Sato's ambition, however, had suffered a direct hit. The public perception was that he had been outmaneuvered by a rookie, his dismissive arrogance a stark contrast to Nizhoni's quiet mastery. He wasn't demoted, but his star, once ascended, now flickered with uncertainty. His colleagues, particularly the nursing staff and younger doctors who had witnessed his disdain, now regarded him with a mixture of polite distance and subtle judgment. Sato found himself excluded from certain informal consultations, his opinions sometimes met with a subtle nod towards what the nurse might think. The experience planted a grudging, unsettling seed of humility in him. He began observing Nizhoni, not with scorn, but with a bewildered fascination, trying to deconstruct her preternatural instincts, realizing that true skills sometimes transcended the prestigious degrees he so coveted. The experience hadn't changed him into a selfless team player overnight, but it had introduced a necessary crack in his armor of arrogance, forcing him to acknowledge the limits of his own knowledge and the value of expertise found outside conventional channels. Nizhoni Blackhorse didn't seek fame, nor did she want a promotion that would take her away from direct patient care. Her authenticity remained her anchor. Yet, Apex Medical Center could no longer ignore her. Her quiet authority, once unrecognized, now resonated through the hospital. She continued her rounds, tending to patients with the same gentle touch and acute observation, but now, doctors paused to seek her opinion on subtle symptoms, nurses approached her for guidance on challenging patients, and even Novak herself often sought out Nizhoni's calm presence before making critical decisions. She was assigned to a specialized rapid response team for complex trauma, her expertise a known quantity. Her indigenous heritage, once a subtle undercurrent, now formed a part of her recognized unique identity, a blend of modern medicine and deeply intuitive, holistic understanding. She didn't wear a special badge, but her presence in Apex was like a vital, strong root, grounding the high-tech institution in something more fundamental, more human. The rigid culture of Apex Medical Center began a slow, subtle shift. The story of Sergeant Mensah and Nurse Blackhorse became a whispered legend, then a guiding principle. It fostered a new openness to unconventional solutions, a greater respect for the frontline insights of nurses and other medical staff, and a subtle erosion of the rigid hierarchy that had once defined it. It was a testament that true courage and life-saving skill could arise from the most unexpected places, often from those traditionally overlooked. Nizhoni, still humble, continued her work, her quiet authority a new, empowering force. Her past, once hidden in the shadows of combat zones, now illuminated her path, proving that the most profound healing often comes not from power or prestige, but from compassion, instinct, and the unwavering belief in life itself. Apex had learned that the human element, in all its diverse forms, was its most valuable asset, and in Nizhoni Blackhorse, they had found a healer whose spirit and skill promised a future where care was not just excellent, but deeply human. Nizhoni's story beautifully reminds us that true healing often stems not from prestige, but from quiet courage, profound instinct, and skill found in unexpected places. What unsung heroes in your life have shown you this truth? Share your thoughts below. If this journey resonated, please consider subscribing and joining our wonderful global community. Your support genuinely helps us create more compelling, deeply human stories like Nizhoni's. Thank you so much for watching and for being an essential part of our growing family. Together, we celebrate the extraordinary.